Hey, what's up, guys? I appreciate y'all joining in today. Let's talk a little bit today about how to stage a turbo car. I get a lot of questions, a lot of emails. There's a lot of people that ask. Some of the in-car videos, you can kind of see what's happening pretty good, but I'm going to explain the way my car is, the way I stage it. Now, every car is a little bit different, so some people may have different techniques. They may have different software. They may have some different hardware, but the basics are essentially the same. So stay tuned. I'm going to show y'all how I stage my turbo car. We're sitting in the race car, sitting in the driver's seat. So this is my view when I'm making a pass. I'm sitting in the race car trailer at the moment, of course. The things that you got to do, you got to have a trans brake. So the trans brake is in the transmission. It's the valve body. And so basically what the trans brake's going to do is when you press the button, this is my trans brake button. So when you press the trans brake button, there's a solenoid on the side of the transmission. So what happens is the solenoid engages and it locks first gear and reversed together. So this is my shifter. I've got a Power Glide transmission. So it's a standard pattern. So that's park, then you got reverse, then neutral, then second, and then first. So right there, I'm in first gear. And so this is my trans brake button. So I put this thing here. There's a couple different train of thoughts. Some people like to have them up on the steering wheel. Some people like to have them, on the dash where they're way up here and they pull off. I like to have mine down here on the shifter. And there's a couple things. You can do it with your thumb. Some people do it with their thumb. They hold it with their thumb and slide it off. They let off. Some people snatch it off real fast. But for me, what I have found is the fastest for me cutting the best light is my index finger. And so it's a pointer finger, so I will press it and then slide it off like this normally. That's what I normally try to do. I just use usually just the very, very end, the tip of my finger, and I'm pushing down on it, and it's hard to see, but it's kind of holding on the edge with some pressure, and then you pop it off. And then that moves pretty fast, and usually you can cut some good lights. And so that's the way I do it. So, obviously, of course, for everything to be working, the ignition's got to be on. Press the button. You're in first gear. Now, if some people, the new craze is turbo 400, so they'll take a turbo 400 and it's a 3-speed transmission, and it can leave in first gear or second gear, and then it's got third gear. But so for a Power Glide, you got first gear, second gear. If you press this button while it's in second gear and it activates the trans brake, it will not lock reverse up. However, that's how we used to actually stage the car. Back before we had this handy dandy thing, we would put it in second gear, press the trans brake button, put it to the floor, hold the brakes while it was in high gear. And so this is pressed and mashed down, and it's banging because the rev limiter is activated. And then once it builds boost, you pull it down to first gear with it still pressed. And then when the tree comes down, you let go of the button and the car takes off. So that's how we used to do it. But anyway, that's just a little food for thought. If you don't have a bump box, you can stage like that. And when it's in second gear, it will actually go to the limiter if you got it on 4,000 or 4,200. But anyway, that's a little sidetrack from what I was going to talk about initially. So anyway, so you got your trans brake button. The trans brake is in the transmission. When it's activated, it locks first and reverse together, and the car just can't move. And so that's what this controls. So basically, it's just got a power wire coming in from the battery. It goes down, and then it goes off into the trans brake solenoid. So the trans brake solenoid, most of them now are 2 wires. So you have a negative and a positive. And so that's what that does. It's got a negative wire, and this goes down to the positive, and it energizes it. And then it lets it go. And of course, it is spring activated. So it, pops in and pops out typically. There are some trans brake solenoids that are not spring activated, and it has to have fluid pressure. And so those type of trans brakes, you press and you let go, you don't hear anything. You never hear anything, and nothing actually moves. So that is, one of the things, it just depends on the trans brake. So the trans brake. So part of that power wire, the power wire that goes down and is going down to the valve body to the solenoid on the valve body on the transmission, it tees off and it goes over into my rat's nest of wiring into a Holley. It's called an anti-flyback transmission input protector or something like that. I don't know exactly what it's called, but basically it has a positive, a negative, and a blue wire that comes out. And so the positive comes from here, and then the negative it grounds, and then the blue wire. And I could have the wiring, the color is wrong, but the blue wire goes over to the input of the Holley. And so basically what happens is sometimes there are spikes. Now, I'm not an electrical engineer, and I don't know a ton about electricity other than, sometimes it does some unexpected things. And so there's solenoids on here. So when that solenoid, it is a magnet. It's an electromagnet. And so when it activates, so when you put power to it, it pulls it in. And so when you let off, it pulls out. And apparently, sometimes or all times, I don't know if it's just randomly, but that thing will send an electrical current back through the power wire, even though you've let it off, and it's a backfeed somehow. And so if you don't have that input protection circuitry on the Holley, then that could go in and it would fry the input on the Holley, and then it just kills basically that input for the Holley. So if you got a Holley HP, you've only got 4 of those, so then you're in trouble. So you don't have as many left. And, I guess it could do internal damage otherwise. I don't know if it could, arc off and do more damage or not, but that would, be bad. So make sure you have that. So then that blue wire comes from that trans brake protection circuitry, and it goes over to the Holley and to an input. And then in the laptop, that's where I actually, input, okay, I want the 2-step to be at, 3,600 or 3,800, 4,000, 4,200, whatever you want it to be. And so when that is activated, so when this is pressed, that step 1 rev limiter is activated. So now we got that step 1 activated, rev limiter activated, and we know it's going to be there. So for my car, I roll in, I'm looking at the staging beam over here to the left, and so it comes up, and I light the first bulb. I'm pre-staged now, and if you're racing a nitrous car or supercharger car, they might be trying to play with you, so you kind of got to, wisely assess your staging technique. Sometimes other turbo cars mess you up too, so you got to be careful with all of them. So, you got to decide if you're going in first or you need to talk to people. You decide your staging technique. So I'm not going to talk about all that. So anyway, so you got the first bulb lit, so you're pre-staged. So now you're pre-staged. Your foot is all the way on the brake pedal. It's pushed to the floor. So you got it pushed to the floor over here. You're in first gear, and then you hit this trans brake button. So now you go bump, and now you're ready to go to the limiter. And so you floor it. I keep a little bit of pressure on my brake pedal. And I'll show you something else I do a little bit later as well. But I basically keep a little bit of pressure on the brakes, and this just makes it so that it doesn't bump quite so violently. So it comes up, hits the 2-step. Some people, they'll have a gauge in here, a cluster, which I don't, a boost gauge or an electronic Holley dash or a race pack dash. And then once it hits a certain amount of boost, they start trying to go into the stage. Now, generally, you have 7 seconds. You got 7 seconds to roll from the pre-stage to the stage once 3 bulbs are lit. So you got the top 2 bulbs lit, and then somebody turns on the stage, then the other person has 7 seconds to go in. So, that's something you have to think about too. So, some turbo cars are really laggy. They spool. It seems like, 10 seconds, 12 seconds. Other ones spool up really fast. So that's, something you have to be careful of. If your car is a fast spooler or a slow spooler, you have to stage accordingly. So I've got it up on where I need to be. So now next comes the next thing. So you've all heard of bump boxes. Bump box, I think, is made by Davis. And he was like one of the first ones, and now there's a whole bunch of different ones. Smooth Stage. There's a whole bunch of different ones. Holley does it. It can do it integrated, but I use the Pulse Leash, and this thing is awesome. Out of all my stuff that I've had electronics-wise, this thing has probably been the most trouble-free. And let me show you just how this thing works real easy. It's real easy, real quick. And so I can set it right here, and that's the reason it's mounted here within reach. Because depending on how I'm staging, if it's got a lot more boost or a lot more RPM, or, vice versa, if it's a lot less boost and a lot lower RPM, I can change this. And so this is the Pulse Leash, is the one I've got. And so I can adjust it. So what this number is here, this is how quickly the trans brake solenoid cycles. So I can adjust this. So from right here, so it's on 18 now. I can go 19, 20, 21. And the higher this number is, the more violent, the longer the delay is what it is. the higher number for the to move and lower number for less move. And he tells you right there on the screen. So 0.25 on this, it would take about one bump and it would be through the lights. It would be very violent. So 18 is where I was at. So if I'm going up in RPM and if I'm going up in boost, so if normally I'm leaving at 4,000, I say, okay, at 4,000, 5 pounds of boost, and now I want to leave at 4,200 and 8 pounds of boost, what I would do is I would come in here, I usually move 2 numbers at a time. I would go 16, and then, you hit save, and then it saves it. And so that's going to move a little bit less. That's going to, the higher I think what it is, from what I can tell, the higher the number, the longer the pulse is. It doesn't pulse it quite as fast on the trans brake solenoid. And so what it does is when you're at a higher RPM, essentially what happens is the converter is coupled more. It's coupled more, and it's closer to the flash speed. So that's why, that thing is different. So anyway, so let's say I'm leaving here. I've got 18. And so this next thing is really cool. This is the pulses per button push. And so you can do 0 to 10. And some people do 1, and those are the cars that jump in very violently. It's like a bunny hop into the beams. Mine, you can see I've got it set on 4. So what happens with mine is I come over here, I'm sitting here. This is my bump button. Yes, that's a horn button from like AutoZone or O'Reilly's, one of the parts store. But I wanted something big. I wanted it easy to see. I wanted it easy to grab. Now, if I pull this thing, so the way this thing is wired, so it's got a hot and a negative, and I talked earlier about that 2-wire solenoid. So the 2-wire solenoid on the trans brake, the positive comes from here. So now the negative comes from the pulse leash, and so that's wired to this. And so when I hit this, it cycles the negative on the trans brake solenoid. And so basically, what this thing does with 4, that's going to be 4 pulses for 1 push. And so what happens is it cycles. When I get staged up on the 2-step, I'm holding this trans brake down and it is banging. I've got launch boost. I'm at 8 pounds of boost launch boost. Then with my left hand, while this one is still pressed, with my left hand, I push that button and it's going to pulse 4 times very rapidly. So while my foot is on the brake pedal down here, just a little bit, slight pressure, and then I hit that and it pulses. And some of my in-car videos, you'll hear it. It'll go clunk, 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 clunk. And it goes really fast and it's really smooth. And you can see when I stage, it's nothing violent. It's nothing, it just smooth, very easy smooth. Now, what happens if I make a mistake? And okay, say it doesn't go in. Say I didn't turn on the pre-stage, quite hard enough. I can hold this down so it would bump 4 times. And then I think it's within the next 10 seconds or 20 seconds. I don't know what this thing is set at. It's internal in the circuitry, predetermined. But so I hit it once and it pulses 4 times. And then every time I hit it after that is a single pulse. But more importantly, what I do is I hit it once, and then if it doesn't quite go in far enough, then if you hold it, this thing, that 18 is no longer valid. It is a very, 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 very small bump. And at that point, I can hold it and take off the brake completely, and it'll go ahead and stage. And if it needs to move another inch or 2, but usually I just hit it in that one thing and it goes. And the other thing you can do too is if you screwed up and you've got it to where it's a little too violent, and you hit it on 4 and it starts bumping and you've got a little bit of pressure here, when that stage button turns on, you can just floor your brake to the floor, and it'll stop it usually. And it might, still move a little bit, but it'll kind of hem it down and stop for the most part. So this is how you stage. And so once you bump in, you're in and you're ready to go. Light comes down, then you just quickly, boom, just pop off this thing and you're set. Now, one of the other things you see a lot of cars that have the reverse lights, tied into their trans brake. And that's great. That tells you a couple things. We've seen a few times where the trans brake solenoid's been accidentally activated, and you'll see the brake lights come on in the back, and you can see it in the data log as well when it comes on. But there's something else that happens. And so look down here in mine, it's hard to see, it's dark, but there's a light that's coming on down there. You can see it coming on, and basically what that light is it's just a light bulb with a socket. And instead of running the brake lights in the back or the reverse lights, I've just got it hooked to that. and that's an anti-flyback. It kind of kills off the voltage. And there again, I'm not an electrical engineer, so I don't know exactly how it works. But they say what happens is when that, I guess it's like an alternator. When the magnet energizes with the power, when it comes back, it produces that spike. And so if you don't have some type of light bulb to absorb that energy, sometimes it delays actually this, because, you know, it's got power still, and it takes a minute for it to, you know, to dissipate, I guess. So that's why I put that down there, that light bulb down there that is attached. It's just a normal light bulb down. It's just under the carpet. It only comes on when my trans brake solenoid is activated, when the trans brake is activated. So over here, I've got my CO2 bottle, and then, you know, it comes down with CO2 lines, and then that goes to the boost controller, and then that's how I control boost, and I've got my launch boost and all that stuff. So that's all programmable in the Holley, of course. So that's kind of the basics on a turbo car, you know, on how I stage mine. It's really easy. So one of the things too, all the noise we've been hearing the whole time we've been pressing this button, that actually is not my trans brake solenoid. My trans brake solenoid is one of the ones that does not have a spring on it. In order for my solenoid to get pushed out, the plunger, then it has to be running. It uses fluid pressure. What you're actually hearing is my roll control that is on the firewall up there. And I'll show that to you in a minute. And basically what I do, so when I get pre-staged, and remember I told you I press this down, I've got this down and it holds, and my roll control actually goes to the back brakes. And I've had this on the car forever. And it may delay my reaction times a little bit. But what I was trying to make it do is just pulse in easier and make it bump easier before I got this pulse leash. And before, you know, back in the day when I wasn't able to bump, I would, you know, pump up the pressure a little bit and then stage in that second gear and first gear. And it just makes staging a little easier. So I don't know I'm sure there are other people that are doing that too, but that's the solenoid that I've got hooked to it goes in line to the back brakes. And so my plan is what happens is when I press this down and I energize this, now it holds pressure on the back brakes so that it does not move as easy. So that might have something to do with the way my car is really smooth to stage as well. So I'll show that to you. But that's the way you stage it. That's the way you stage a turbo car. You know, sometimes you'll see the car, you know, John Doc done a video a long time ago what it feels like in the front. I mean, jumping. I mean, it's all banging and bucking and feeling like you're on a horse. But if it's doing that, then, you know, definitely there is some improvement that you can have in your program. But anyway, so that's how you stage turbo car. That's how I stage mine. Please comment, like, and subscribe. If y'all got any questions, put them down in the link. I read all the comments, and I will respond to as many of them as I can. Actually, it'll be all of them. I'll respond to all your questions. Y'all go fast and get some win lights. We're going to try next week.